Okay, we're going to look into giants in the New World now. And while we do, the music in the background is Killer of Giants by Ozzy Osbourne. Here in Texas, they had found a large skull. You can see in the picture here on the right. And there's even a bit of misinformation here in this. But I want to share this with you as we look at this and some tellings of the Lovelock Cave and show you where this idea of giants comes from. And the red-headed giants, they're known as red-haired giants. There's more than 150 tribes that are separated from each other that talk about red-haired giants. So we'll look into that too here in a moment. But I want to show you this beach giant skull unearthed by WPA workers near Victoria, believed to be the largest ever found in the world. Normal head was found. The Texas had a giant on the beach, and the long ago appears probable from a large skull recently unearthed in the mound in Victoria County, believed to be the largest human skull ever found in the United States and probably the world. Twice the size of a skull of a normal human, the fragments were dug up by W. Duffin, archaeologist who's excavating the mound in Victoria County under a WPA project sponsored by the University of Texas. In the same mound, at the same level, a normal-sized skull was found. The pieces taken from the mound were laboratory under supervision of the physical anthropologist. A study is being made to determine whether the huge skull was that of a man belonging to a tribe of extraordinary large men, or whether the skull was that of an abnormal member of a tribe, perhaps someone who had gigantism. Several large human bones were also been unearthed at the site. Now, Marcus B. Goldstein, who's a physical anthropologist employed at the WPA project, formerly was an aide of Ailes Hendrickson, who is curator of the National Museum of Physical Anthropology. Finds have been made through the excavations in Texas are beginning to give weight to the theory that man lived in Texas 40,000 to 45,000 years ago, it said. Now, I recently showed you the Galt site that dates back 16 to 20,000 years and how that's not accepted. So you can imagine kind of what happened to this. It got squished pretty quick. Now, the odd thing here is that when they looked at the cranial forms and actually did the measurements of the two on the left, they thought this is a male and a female. They were kind of normal sized, and there was a giant head. After doing the cranial measurements, both of those are abnormally large. They said the female would have been well over 6 foot, as well as the male, and you can tell the male head, the middle one there's a little bigger. So, you know, let's say she was 6'2", 6'6", and he was a little taller than that, a little more robust. But then the guy on the right, whenever they did the cranial measurements on it, came out to be somebody around 13 or 14 foot tall. And that doesn't fit right. Also, the eye sockets, cheekbones, and brow ridges and things don't show to have the megalomania, the thing that shows up on like Andre the Giant and people that actually quite often have this type of thing. So if we look at the Paiute references that they had from these times here, what we have is an oral history of Setika, or Seduka, or Sai, and their legendary tribes whose mummified remains were allegedly discovered under 4 feet of guano by guano miners in what's known as Lovelock Cave in Lovelock, Nevada, United States, although the cave's been mined since 1911 for fertilizer. Miners did not notify authorities until 1912. The miners destroyed many of the artifacts, but archaeologists were still able to retrieve 10,000 Paiute artifacts from that cave. The items include thule, duck decoys, sandals, and baskets, several dating back well over 2,000 years old. Now, Sitika actually literally means Thule eaters in the language of the Paiute. Now, Thule is odd. They use that Thule, Greenland, my dad was stationed at, which is a fibrous plant that they have that grows on the edge of it there. Thule is a fibrous water plant. In order to escape harassment from the Paiutes, the Sitikas were said to have lived on rafts made of tule in the lake. And so they would have had these reed boats that we talked about before. And so they're living on rafts and reed boats in the lake in a floating mass. Is this what we're left to believe? This is what they tell us. Now, according to the Paiutes, the Sitika were a red-haired band of cannibalistic giants. The Sitika of the Paiutes were at war, and after a long struggle of coalition tribes, trapped the remaining Sitika in Lovelock Cave. When they refused to come out, the Indians piled bush before the cave mouth and set it aflame. The Sitika were annihilated during this, and they said that they had killed off the giants. Now, this is a story that's been around. Many people have heard this one before, but Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, where this comes from, she's the daughter of a Paiute chief, Winnemucca. She wrote about what she described as a small tribe of barbarians who ate her people in a book called Life Among the Paiutes, Their Wrongs and Claims. And she wrote that after my people had killed them all, the people around also called us Sayodukara, and it means conqueror, but it also means enemy, which wasn't that great of a concept to them whenever she describes it. Many people say that the tribe were exterminated had red hair. She said that she had some of their hair which had been handed down from father to son, and that she has a dress which has been in our family for a great many years, trimmed with the reddish hair. I'm going to wear it sometime when I lecture, she said. It is called a mourning dress, and no one has such a dress but my family. Hopkins doesn't mention giants. She mentions a small tribe of red-headed people, and that's kind of telling whenever you figure out that there were lots of red-headed people over here during pre-Indian times, and there's many people that talk about this. They don't have to necessarily be giants. Now, one thing people don't realize is that your average Indian was just barely over 5 foot tall. Indeed, there were many tribes that they were fairly tall and close to 6 foot, but your average Indian would have only been around 5 foot tall. So a person being over 6 foot tall would have been a giant to them, a basketball player, as you say, of today. You know, a lot of Mexicans still have a lot of shorter stature to them. They're not basketball players as such, you say. So, people that are a foot and a half, 2 foot above you are going to literally be giants. Anyhow, Adrienne Mayer writes about the Sitika in her books, Legends of the First Americans. She suggests that giant interpretations about the skeletons from Lovelock Cave and other dry caves in Nana was started by the entrepreneurs setting up tourist displays, and that the skeletons themselves were just of normal size. However, about 100 miles north of Lovelock, there are plentiful fossils of mammoths, cave bears, and their large limb bones could easily be thought to those being of giants by an untrained observer. So this also happened in Greece and places like that, where they found dinosaur bones, and they said that these were the bones of ancient giants and so on, where we get this tale from. They would find a leg bone of something like a mammoth and then think that, well, it looks like a leg bone of a person, but it's almost twice that tall. Gosh, that guy was 20 foot tall. Things along this line. So, if we look into it further, she also discusses the reddish hair, pointing out that the hair pigment's not stable after death, and that various factors such as temperature could have bleached it out or leached it to another red or orange color. But we found out, especially through dry area caves, which is what this is, even the mummies and stuff, they don't change their hair. And now, after this point, this was in 1900s, back in there, now we know about the Wari tribes of red-haired and blonde-haired giants that were also down in South America, that the Pizarro, whenever he went there, they said they were the last of the children of the gods. So it's possible that these are some of those same people here, these taller people, more Caucasoid-looking, red-haired giants that don't have the common Indian features with all straight-back hair. So, it could be that people are making false descriptions and stuff. And also, she wants to say that the remains, whenever they found them, were described as giant. In other words, when they said this, they were like, oh, it's a giant find. It's a big find, but they described it as giant. And that could have also taken off on the fact that these were giants. Now, not to belittle anybody's work that says that these were giants that living in these caves, but how big are giants? Well, a written report by James Hart, the first two miners to excavate the cave in the fall of 1911, recalls in the north central part of the cave, about 4 foot deep in the guano, through there was a striking looking body of a man, about 6 foot 6 inches tall. His body was mummified, and his hair was distinctly red. Unfortunately, in the first years of mining, some of the human remains and artifacts were lost and destroyed. The best specimen of adult mummies was boiled and destroyed by local fraternal lodge, which wanted the skeleton for initiation process purposes. Now, this is like your Skull and Bones Society and such people. Also, several of the fibrous sandals found in the cave were remarkably large, and one reported it over 15 inches long in length and is said to display on the Nevada's Historical Society's Museum in Reno in 1952, but has since also disappeared. The Paiute tradition asserts that the Sitika people practiced cannibalism, and this may have had some basis in fact. During the 1924 excavation of the cave, a series of 3 human bones were found at the surface towards the mouth of the caves, and these had been split to extract the marrow, as animal bones were split, and probably indicate cannibalism during famine, or people finding bones and trying to get any nourishment they can out of them. But it was looked at as being much later. So there's Sitika. And indeed, there are stories of Indiana's red-haired giants. One disturbing thing, though, that shows you about Lovelock Valley and Lovelock Cave is that they tell you here is a continued from page 1 on the Reed story that they had from there. They tell you that this is one of the skeletons of a giant red-headed Indian, and the other is the calendar stone that they had found along with it, and a rancher called W.C. Pitt calendar stone in his honor. Nobody knows where these are, by the way. The skeleton found near the Rogers Ranch last year measures 7 feet 7 inches and was in excellent conditions. Parts of the red hair even remaining on the skull. This has been carefully stored away, but nobody knows where anymore. Just outside of Athens, Georgia, giant skeletons were found, thought to have been Indians of giant proportions. They say the skeletons of 2 Indians have been unearthed along the banks of Hocking River at Roach Mill, 1/2 mile east of Athens. The excavation was made under a large building, a short distance from the bank of the river. Unearthed a few feet from the skeletons were many arrowheads, which no doubt were buried with the Redskins when they were sent either by accident or natural death to the Happy Hunting Grounds. The skeletons were evidently those of gigantic men. Judging by the bones, they could not have measured less than 7 feet in stature. The bones were in excellent state of preservation, the teeth being still firmly embedded in the maxillary bones. Wish we had some of those teeth now, we could DNA check these. Just to give you an example of how many stories there are of red-headed people and giants, if you figured both of them in, across North America, you can see a disturbing pattern that it's basically widespread everywhere. There's some gaps, and then through this area here there are none, but pretty much everywhere else there are. Way up in the mountains, nobody lives in a few of these places, but where people live, they talk about these things. All the way up into here, and look at the concentrations in the northeast. Even though most of the stories come from Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, and out here in the west, right through here. But it's nothing to walk down the corridor here and go to South America also, like I was talking about before. Another oddity you can find here is there talks about red-haired giants here, and the fact that they actually have physical evidence of these giant feet here. Giants did occupy North America. These mummified feet were stored unrecognized for many years in a museum in Niagara Falls, Canada. Now, interesting fact with that is that when Abraham Lincoln went through doing his speeches, he went to Niagara Falls, and they had recently found these mummies that were giant. And in his speech, he says, does not the giants that we see here today walk these same places that we walked here before? And he mentions it in his speech. So there's some of this that can't be mulled over much. But so these feet right here would have been like a size 23 shoe. So this guy would have been about the size of Shaq. Now somebody called them the red-haired giant feet of Pharaoh Ramses I. But that's not the effect on these ones that were in here. Many stories. Giants from 7 to 11 feet tall, all over North America. So here's a look at Lovelock Cave here as we finish this one. But were they giants? Well, maybe some of them were, and especially in comparison to the local Indians. But one thing's for sure, most people have them listed as redheads, and they were the killer giants.